What's up, guys? Welcome back to Slow Mode. We're on our 40-second live stream. Thank y'all for tuning with me this evening. We're back in the state of Texas. Uh, Thank y'all for taking the time to tune in this evening, wherever you're viewing from, what time you're viewing from, whether that be currently or in the future. But nonetheless, we're proud and happy to be back. But we got a lot to cover today, so we're gonna be streaming for about an hour. So feel free to ask any questions that may plague your minds. Funny how I use the word plague, because in this topic we're gonna be talking about the African Moors, quote unquote blacks, were burned publicly by the Christians before slavery. We're going to break this down and basically give you guys the synopsis and the evidence and information, and basically give you our references and our citations so that you all can do your own research. So yes, it's a major topic because a lot of other platforms are not sharing this information. They're not willing to take it to this length. They're not willing to break it down in layman's terms to where a lot of individuals will understand. A vast majority of individuals will understand. So we're taking the time to compile the evidence and release it all to you guys. So before I get into that, let me just say, check out our merchandise. Buy our merchandise on our official website, slow-moe'd.com. Link is in the description for the shirt and our website. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. We're almost to 1,000 subscribers. We will be creating a 900 celebratory video, 900 subscribers celebratory video within the upcoming week. So hope you look out to that. And also comment. We recently released our latest slow-moed moorishportal. Drop a comment section what you guys thought about that. TLC, my life to the Powerpuff Girls universe. Check that out. It's very entertaining and it transports you perceptually to that universe with the sound of music. iPhone Air comes in light gold. Let me change that. There we go. Okay. So, yes, like I said in the beginning, the topic of today is African Moors, quote unquote, blacks, were burned publicly by the Christians before slavery. So, let's get into that. Some of the books that we're going to be covering today. I'm a little ecstatic, so excuse the snickering. But as you guys may have seen in the past live streams, we went over a little bit of this book, The Spanish Inquisition by Jean Palladio. The Rise, Growth, and the Fall. This is 3 volumes, 600 pages. We're also going to include in here The Crusades by Zoe Oldenburg, both female authors. And we got about 4 different dictionaries right here. And we also have another book. I'm having fun right now, if you haven't noticed. But Dogs of Gods by James Reston. So we're going to cover all these books. But first, I'm gonna make a couple statements. Let me fix the camera. Get my keys up to view. This isn't Mary from TikTok. There are keys on the wall. But we're going to give some definition first. I gave the definition of the word that we're going to be using today so that we're not offending any people. We're basically using science and giving evidence to back up our claims and our evidence. So we're basically using the English language. So I got this book right here, The Concise Definition, Dictionary of English Etymology by Walter W. Skeet. So we're going to go to the word. Hopefully, I don't get banned or copyright strike from, or not copyright strike, but like violation of YouTube terms. But we're gonna go to the word faggot. We're gonna be using this word faggot in this live stream because the word faggot etymologically, you'll see here on page 142, 143, page 143, the word faggot, it says a faggot, a bundle of sticks. That's the etymological, that's the base meaning of the word faggot. So I got 3 other dictionaries here, but this word faggot was used to refer to a bundle of sticks during the Inquisition when human beings were being burned, publicly burned to the stake or to the faggots. So we're going to cover this, and we're going to be live streaming for about an hour, so until 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. So make sure you ask any questions that you may have. Feel free to interrupt me. But I'm just going to give some background of like the beginning of the Inquisition. And a lot of this, what I'm doing is impromptu because I haven't had the time to like go over all this information. Just sit down and go over it. So just to clear up who I'm talking about, when I say African Moors were being burned publicly, or so-called blacks were being publicly burned by Christians before slavery, let me clear some of this up. So on page 23 of The Spanish Inquisition by Jean Plady, it says here, in the year 1165, the Council of Lumbers was called together in the Diocese of Albi, and the heretics of the south of France were publicly condemned. And from that time, they were all known, whether they were Arians or Gnostics, Manichaeans or Cartharists, as Albigenses, I mean, after the town of Albi in which the council had met. So the people that were persecuted, whether they be Arians or Gnostics, which Gnostic is some of the teachings that we teach on our slow-moed Moorish, on our slow-moed business, basically, in our slow-moed channel, our website, etc. Through our clothing, we use esoteric or Gnostic or mystical knowledge. All this knowledge traces back into the interior continent of Africa, which is the same as the origin of Homo sapiens sapien, or modern human, comes from. So anybody, according to the Inquisition, anybody that was against the Christian or Catholic faith during the medieval times that the Inquisition was taking place, they were persecuted and excommunicated or burned publicly or tortured by the Catholic or Christian church, or so they say, the secular arm of the church, so that they take the blame off themselves. So let's go here to page 26 Um, so it says, thus, in the year 1208, began the war against the Albigenses, or I'm pronouncing that word wrong, Albigenses, which was to drag on for 15 years and bring great misery to people who had asked for nothing but to be allowed to use their minds and state their opinions. It was more than the wasteful, stupid war, for out of this misery and horror was born that monster, the Inquisition. So the Inquisition was born during the 13th century, where people were tortured, persecuted, excommunicated by the Catholic Church and the Christian Church. So I'm gonna flip to page 37 of the same book. All the stories of his virtues, all the tales of his saintliness cannot compensate for the zeal he displayed in hounding the heretic. Um, he, Saint Dominic, will be remembered as the first inquisitor. So Saint Dominic was considered the first inquisitor. He is also the founder of the Dominicans, the order which was responsible for the development of the Inquisition and the coming to power of men such as Thomas de Torquemada. So as we discussed in the live stream in the past, we basically said that Thomas de Torquemada was of Jewish ancestry, though he was being basically a hypocrite, going against his Jewish ancestry and targeting and persecuting the Jews and killing and torturing them, even though his great grandmother or his grandmother was of Jewish descent, which is said in this book, The Spanish Inquisition by Jean Palady, and it's also referenced in The Dogs of God by James Reston. So let's flip over to James Reston's book. See if we can find out on Torquemada. See, now this isn't pre-planned. This isn't I don't have a list somewhere where I'm able to just look up and see what I will be talking about today. So I'm going off the top of my head and from what I've read. So just bear with me as I find these references since it's fresh on my mind. Yeah, let us know where you're watching from. If you're watching in the future time, let us know what country or state you're watching from. Any questions that you all want to ask in the comment sections, feel free to ask. Let's just type in grandmother, see where that takes us. I have it highlighted, so okay, here we go. So I found the reference. Thanks to technology, you know. So on page 39 of The Dogs of God by James Reston, we're gonna read this highlight section right there. So it says, Torquemada burned with a vivid hatred of heresy and of many Christian of whatever background who might conceivably be guilty of it. His grandmother had been a Jew, and this dirty little secret seemed to drive his passion against Jews and Christians of Jewish heritage into a determined and permanent rage. He longed for the quote unquote pure blood of an Castilian Christian and believed that Jewish blood was darker in hue and as it contaminated the body. In the absence of any persecution of heretics at all in Castile, the quote unquote old Inquisition was not good enough for this bloodless fanatic. As he received Isabella's confessions during this period, he sought to extract a promise from her. Quote, and I quote, "If you ever come to the throne, you must devote yourself to the liquidation of heresy for the glory of God and the exaltation of the Catholic Church." End quote. So I went over this in the previous live stream. Um, Basically saying that he got the good side of Isabella to persuade her. So now let's get on the topic of faggots and how the Moors and Jews, or dark-skinned people, African Moors, were burned publicly before slavery. This all took place, the Spanish Inquisition and the Inquisition took place years, hundreds of years before slavery, or the transatlantic slave trade, after the expulsion of the Moors in 1492. So we got a lot of people that, not to shame anyone, but we have a lot of people that like to glorify um, medieval things, and for example, the death mask, not the death mask, but the medicine mask and all this, and blah blah blah. But once we mention what they were doing to the dark-skinned people, also called Moriscos, Moors, Morenos, etc., Christian converted Jews, Christian converted Muslims, or even people practicing Gnosticism and not believing Christianity, the teachings of Christianity and Catholicism during this period of time, they were persecuted and burned publicly to the faggots, gathered their sticks so that they could be burned publicly at the Auto de Fe. So give me a moment as I look for more context. I'm pretty sure this will be in the second book, so let me go to that. The growth. Okay, we're not at the growth. Inquisition. Okay, that's the end of the book. We're at the growth then. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. Yeah, so we got in this book, just to touch a little bit more on Thomas de Torquemada, on page 126 of The Spanish Inquisition by Jean Palladio. Okay, it says here, Sambatini in Torquemada and the Spanish Inquisition states that this decree entirely contradicts Polgar's assertion that Torquemada was of Jewish extraction. Yet it seems possible that a man as powerful as Torquemada would not have allowed himself to be pushed aside by such a decree. And as the Jewish grandmother is not mentioned by Catholic writers, it may surely have been that if Torquemada was eager to forget the Jewish strain, those about him were equally ready to help him. As for Isabella herself, she was not averse to conversos as such. It was only when she heard stories of their reverting to their own faith that she was horrified. She kept many conversos in her personal service. She would therefore have felt no revulsion towards Torquemada, who was such a zealous Catholic, merely because he had a Jewish grandmother. So that's just some more context to add. Let's go to, yeah, I didn't have a chance to basically go through this book and like take notes. I got plenty of notes in the book, plenty of highlights, etc. But as far as the topic of today, which would be African Moors, quote unquote blacks, were burned publicly before by the Christians before slavery. This is to give some light or some knowledge to the people or the blacks that don't understand African Moorish history during the medieval times, um, and to connect them since their history teachers in in grade school didn't connect the history of the blacks with the African Moors going back into Europe, but only trying to grade tests and grade assignments. So yeah, we're giving some context with evidence. All this can be backed up. So on page, this is the end of Torquemada. That was during Bob Dylan. Okay, so we got here on page 27 of The Growth of the Spanish Inquisition by Jean Palady. It says, those Catholic writers who seek to excuse his cruelties, I'm talking about Thomas de Torquemada, it says that there have been gross exaggerations as to the number of people who burned to the stake during his rule. There may have been exaggerations by Protestant writers, but one cannot help feeling that the Catholics have been overwhelmingly modest with their figures. Lorente states that between 1483 and 1498, while Torquemada was in command, 8,800 were burned to the stake. 96,504 suffered less severe penalties. Some historians put figures at 10,000 burned by fire. Michael Oates, writing in the Catholic Encyclopedia, tells us that the purity of the Christian faith was in danger, and that the action of Torquemada was necessary to preserve Spain. He also states that only 2,000 were burned between the years 1481 and 1504, when Isabella died. So as you can see, there's a lot of point shavings or number shavings, that, as we would say in this case, of the number of fatalities taking place against the heretics or those persecuted by the Inquisition. So it says here, on page 46 of The Growth of the Spanish Inquisition, the first auto de fe on this occasion, it was the books which were burned. There would be other occasions when human flesh would take the place of books. So we're talking about the very start of the Inquisition. Later on, it eventually developed into the Moors and Jews and the heretics. Here we got another some more evidence on page 54 of the growth of the Spanish Inquisition. It says here, anyone who wrote a book tainted with heresy was naturally and self-confessed heretic. Anyone who possessed such a book was merely a suspect. So basically, the books that were written by Jews and Moors were sometimes burned with their bodies. I want to get that reference for you guys, but it's such a big book or big volumes. I have to flip through so many pages. I don't have any notes, ready notes available for this discussion or this topic for today. Okay. We got 34 minutes left. Let me get to those some better references. Get my Howard Berg on. Yeah, this is a huge. These are some huge books. Yeah, it's so many references, so much that's hard to cover or difficult to cover in 1 hour's time. So I'm gonna give some more context on the African Moors as we continue our track as we get to the faggots. So people were now on page 95 of the growth of the Spanish Inquisition. People were now urged to commence spying on one another. It was not necessary for Moriscos to perform actions which obviously proclaimed them to be Mohammedans, such as observing the fast of Ramadan or circumcising their children, praying with faces turned to the east, or indulging in baths. They could be condemned for abstaining from eating of pork and drinking of wine, or for staining their nails with henna, or singing Moorish songs, dancing Moorish dances. So, to touch on the Moorish dancing part, as you all may know, the Inquisition only occurred in the UK only for a short period of time. Uh, you can quote me on this, but it was during, I believe, the persecution of the Knights Templars in the UK. It's in this book, but I'm going off the top of my head. But just to put context on the Moorish dances, there's a Moorish dance that takes place in the UK where it's ritual for the dark-skinned swarthy gypsies, which are still Moors, African Moors, to do the Moorish dance at certain times of the year or certain celebrations, etc. So this is inclusive. This isn't just Arab, Muslim, Islam, so it's inclusive of the dark-skinned and swarthy people, which isn't, which the Moorish Science Temple of America members will not talk about. They won't talk about this. I don't know if Sabir Bey has covered this information or he's just going off of my camera's turning. Sabir, I don't know if Sabir Bey is talking about this or he's just talking about the Muslim the Muslim Moors and not the African Moors, but it's like it's we're covering it here because we go over Gnosticism and mystical philosophy, something that isn't covered by a lot of these other platforms. But as I continue, so dancing Moorish dances, refusing to eat animals which had died a natural death, or even because of the way they slaughtered animals for food. These customs were listed for the use of inquisitors and those who must spy for them. New laws were made for the Moriscos. Moriscos are Christian converted Moors. They must leave their doors open when they are celebrating weddings or on feast days, so that at any moment a spy could mingle with them to discover if they were following any custom which would make it necessary for them to be brought before the inquisitors. There must be no wearing of Moorish garments. Arabic must not be taught or used. At every birth, a Christian midwife must be in attendance. So that's just some further context on the Moors, African Moors. The Arab Moors are included in this as well, though they're hiding the history of the so-called blacks in the Western Hemisphere and the diaspora. Feel free to ask any questions. I'm just surfing through this book. Haven't had time. Hell, here we go. So it took me a minute to get to the faggots, but we're basically here. This is the growth of the Spanish Inquisition, page 128. So as I mentioned earlier with the faggots, we're going to start here. Hooper was taken to Gloucestershire and burned near the cathedral. He too was offered pardon if he would recant, and he too refused it. He suffered dreadfully, for the faggots were sparse and green and would not burn easily, and the fire only reached the lower part of his body because of the direction in which the wind blew. He called for more and more fire at the length of gunpowder. At length, gunpowder was brought. He suffered the most acute agony for 3/4 of an hour, and it is recorded that in the crowds who watched him die, there was much weeping and lamentation. It is gratifying to note that the spectators of these scenes in England were very different from those blood-crazed fanatics of the Quadro. Philip was wise enough to realize that the English did not take as naturally to this sport of burning heretics as did his own people. And it was he who suggested that they should not offer too many such spectacles to the people of England. The day after the burning of Hooper, he caused a sermon to be preached, and the practice of burning heretics alive was condemned. But the law was short-lived. After 5 weeks, a weaver was burned in Smithville, and a short while others followed. So I mentioned earlier that the Inquisition didn't last that long in England or the UK. That was just some clarity. Like I read this book about, it's been about a couple of months since I last read this book. Possibly years. Oh, here goes some more faggots. So we're gonna start reading on page 144. So just to give some more context, that we're not talking about homosexual men. Like we're talking about the etymological meaning of the word faggot as it meant during the medieval times. It says here, bundle of sticks. The word is down here, faggot. You see there, faggot, bundle of sticks, dictionary of concise language. So that's one dictionary. This is the etymological dictionary. We're going to use this dictionary next. Webster's Ninth New Collegiate Dictionary. So we're going to flip to the word faggot. Doesn't mean homosexual men. Etymologically. Now the connotative meaning, which is the newer meaning, as it refers to society in current times, the year 2025, they use it as homosexuals. However, during medieval times, the etymological true origin and definition of the word faggot meant a bundle of sticks. As you see here on page 445, the word faggot says faggot or faggot, noun, Middle English, 14th century, bundles, as a bundle of stick. B, a bundle of pieces of wrought iron to be shaped by rolling or hammering at high temperature. Second definition, faggot or faggot, verb transitive, circa 1598. To make a faggot, to bind together in a bundle of sticks. Up top, it says faggot, noun, origin unknown, and it says the year 1914. A male homosexual, often used disparagingly, faggoty. So the etymological meaning, the true origin of the word, goes back centuries before it was being used to refer to homosexual males. So we have another dictionary here, the American Heritage Dictionary, second college edition. We're going to go to the word faggot. Since the word faggot seems to be banned on social media, and you can't use in YouTube comment section, we're using this as scholarly research. This isn't to insult anybody. This is to go over the history that's been covered up and words that have been meant, that have been forced to become obsolete to confuse those that are in search of true history. So if we go to page 485, see, you have right here, you have two definitions. You have one faggot, variant of faggot. You got two faggot, noun, Offensive slang, a male homosexual. Origin unknown. So, and you have faggot here that says faggot, also faggot. Noun, one, a bundle of sticks or branches bound together. Two, a bundle of pieces of iron or steel to be welded or hammered into bars. To collect or bind into a faggot. Bundle. Two, to decorate with faggoting. So this was a second dictionary if you don't want to include the etymological dictionary of English. And we got a third dictionary. We got Webster's New Universal Unabridged Dictionary. A very thick book. So we're going to go to the word faggot. So we have here on page 657. So you got faggot, noun, a verb and verb transitive, same as faggot. Down here you have faggot, noun, Middle English, faggot, Old French, faggot, a bundle of sticks. From Latin, fax, fascis, a torch. One, a bundle of sticks, twigs, or small branches of trees, used for fuel or for filling ditches and other purposes in fortification. A fascine. And two, in metallurgy, a bundle of heap of iron or steel pieces to be worked into bars by hammering and rolling at welding temperature. Oh, look at this. On the fifth, I'm gonna go through the definitions, but on the fifth definition, it says the punishment of burning at the stake as for heresy. So the third definition, a person formerly hired to take the place of another at the muster of a military company or to hide deficiency in its numbers when it was not full. Four, a term of contempt for a dry, shivered old woman, British slang. And five, the punishment of burning at the stake as for heresy. Six, a badge representing a faggot, worn on the sleeve in the medieval ages by those who had recanted heresy to show the punishment they had so narrowly escaped. So, that was three, maybe four dictionaries, if you want to include the etymological meaning of it. But here on page 144 of the Growth of the Spanish Inquisition by Jean Pallady. Okay, so we're gonna start here at the top. Jacob Springer was a fanatic. He had acted as inquisitor in Germany, where Innocent the Eighth declared in his bull of 1484, witches abounded and endeavored to seduce the good people of those lands to follow their malignant lead. There was a theory at this time that those who worked for the suppression of witchcraft were protected by God and could not be harmed by witches and their familiars, or the demons who were sent from hell to help them. A holy relic worn on the body served as protection, it was believed, and witches grew pale and fled if the victim made the sign of a cross in their presence. Springer declared that he and his colleagues during witch hunts had often been confronted by devils in some animal form. They had never been harmed by them, however, because they were employed in God's service. This, however, did not always appear to be effective, for Springer states that witches often bewitched their judges while they were in the act of sentencing them, and during the burning in the Black Forest, a witch at the moment when her executioner was lighting the faggots at her feet, blew in his face, telling him that he should be rewarded for what he had done that day. Immediately, he was afflicted with leprosy and was dead within a few days, we are told. Such stories inflamed the imagination, and as Spurringer's superstitious legends were accepted as truth, the whole world was ready to believe that witchcraft was the cult of the devil. So, as you all may know, so-called witchcraft came out of the interior of Africa. That's not mentioned in this book, but I'm giving you some context. Oh, and let me include another book. Since we're on the topic of witches, let's go to Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1, 2, and 3 by David McRitchie. As we talk about the witches, so-called witches, because the witches were Moors as well, African Moors, dark-skinned gypsies, fogs, fions, um, criminals, etc. But we're gonna give some more context. That's not even included in the books that we're talking about. That's brought up at the table. I'm going into like more evidence. So let's go to that because we need some context to show that the African Moors are the same dark-skinned and swarthy people that are calling themselves black, so-called black in the diaspora, but they don't know because they don't know history. So if you look here on page 120 of Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 2, it says here, and most of these properties have remained longest in the possession of those Tory classes, commonly called gypsies. So as we mentioned in previous live streams, gypsies, and you can do the research, if you Google gypsies, gypsy is short for Egyptian. The divining rod with which the magician at the court of the pharaohs performed his incantations was swayed also by the British druid and by the band druid, female gypsy or witch. Also, and just as the modern Sibyl of the Hebrews of the Hedgerows refuses to prophesy unless her palm is crossed with silver, so have her kidney done in Britain as far back in the days of Caesar. Oh, here we go. So later right here it says, like these, also, she pretends to gain her prophetic knowledge from the stars, thimble rigging the peculiar property of those classes who, in Mr. Leland's opinion, are more or less of gypsy blood, and who, according to Mr. Simon Simpson, are distinctly gypsies, is an Egyptian origin, or at least was a practice of ancient Egypt. So as we said earlier, the Moorish dance, it says here, the Moorish dance or blackamoors dance, so distinctly a British dance that Handel regarded it as a national dance of the country, was even so recently as the era of the Fifeshire gypsies described by Mr. Simpson, scarcely one removed better than the degrading riot of the worshippers of Osiris. Survivals of such worship may be seen, says Mr. Groom in his Britannica Gypsy article, in the honor paid by the three great German gypsy clans to the fire tree, the birch, and the hawthorn, and in the veneration in which Welsh gypsies hold to the fascinated vegetable growth known as the brutal. So it's just more context. I can get more into detail with Ancient and Modern Britons by David McRitchie, but we're sticking on the African Moors, so-called blacks, being burned publicly by the Christians before slavery. So that's what this topic is about. That's what this live is about. I'm just giving more context, more evidence with references so that you all can do your research and not just think that I'm just speaking off the top of my head with nonsense and tomfoolery with no references. So it says here on page 150, this is some more context on the witches. Even in Britain, usually so much more moderate than other European countries, as I said earlier, with this Inquisition only being limited to a short amount of time in England or UK. The total number of witches done to death in this neighborhood of 30,000, at least a quarter of this number were executed in Scotland. I know this may seem like a lot to take in, a lot to go over, but once the blacks understand this, they can see for themselves their African Moorish history. And this is what your school teachers didn't know or didn't want you to know. This is what the Jews don't want you to know. If you're so-called black or African American in the diaspora. So on page 169, we're going to read here. Thus, in the treatment of mystics, the Spanish Inquisition appears to have behaved with admirably resistant and even mercy, although naturally in these more enlightened days, flogging and solitary confinement seem harsh enough punishment to be meted out to those who are suffering from unbalanced minds. There is no doubt that many of the so-called mystics were clever impostors, and these too were treated with a leniency which was amazing considering the times. It was upon the Jews, Moors, and Lutherans that the inquisitors vented their demoniacal fury, and in the 16th century, when fanatical Philip was desirous of setting it up in every country over which he had control, the growth of the Spanish Inquisition continued and reached its hideous heyday. So this was a hideous scourge on human history. Though a lot of these platforms are not willing to go over this and connect history of the blacks to the African Moorish ancestry and history and science, because they're all intertwined. But the blacks in the Western Hemisphere and in the diaspora are taught that slavery only began. Slavery was the beginning of their history. I didn't get into much detail with there's so much more to go over. Like I can't really go over all of this in one. I can, but I would just have to prepare for it. This was basically last minute. But yeah, I thank y'all for tuning with me. Thank you for bearing through my loud mouthing, because the point has to be understood. That's just some more information on the Moors being having to um, I want to get to the part where the remains or the bones of the Jews and Moors were dug up. Their bones, their remains. So the deceased loved ones of the heretics and the Jews and the Moors, their deceased loved ones was dug up from their graves. Their deeds of their land were obtained and were burned. Uh, they were burned with their bodies. Their books were hung around their necks. Whatever books that they wrote, they dug them up if they had been deceased, and they burned them to the stakes or to the faggots. If I can just find that part, and is it because it's in here? That's what I'm looking for right now. I'm looking for to give you context that they dug up the remains and burned them to the stake. I think that was that was during Torquemada. So let's go back to Thomas de Torquemada. Thomas de Torquemada dug up here we go. I skipped the whole part. So basically, if we go back to the growth of the Spanish Inquisition, page 18, because I have to remember the repercussions of Thomas de Torquemada for him, what the grave robbers did to him after his death. They went and dug up his bones. Thomas de Torquemada's bones were dug up and they were burned or not found, according to some scholars. But on page 18, we have here, now, the usual action should be, let me start earlier. By dint of the usual examination of terrorizing of witnesses, it was discovered that the grandfather of the Bishop of Segovia had been guilty of celebrating the rites of his old religion, although he had been baptized in the Christian faith. Now, the usual action should be taken. The bones of the dead man put in the San Benito, taken to the Quamerdo, and publicly burned. That was not all. His family could not expect to continue in prosperity. Their lands and goods would be confiscated, and they themselves robbed of their offices. So their bones, the remains of the heretics, their bones, their books were taken up, dug out of the grave, and burned to the stake publicly, and their land confiscated, so that their families couldn't even live prosperity. So it's a sad fate that that this is covered up, and that the blacks don't understand this history in relation to slavery or the transatlantic slave trade. And the Jews aren't telling the blacks this, and they share the same history as the so-called blacks or dark-skinned people calling themselves African American, etc. So the Jews are not sharing this information with the blacks, and the blacks don't know African Moorish history. They only know slavery. They don't know anything prior to 1492 or the transatlantic slave trade. They don't understand their blood connection and ancestral connection to the African Moors in Africa and in Europe. So this is where we're at. So I basically gave y'all some context, some evidence. I thank y'all for tuning in. This is it for our 40-second live stream. Make sure y'all subscribe. I can't stress that enough. And we will be back next week, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. Peace.